Okay, so we know all about the rumors going around right now that have to do with Switch revisions. Now, we've heard that there are apparently two Switch revisions in the works right now, and we don't really know much other than that. The Wall Street Journal has done multiple articles at this point. They did their last report that seems to claim that they're both coming out this year, whereas I believe earlier on in the year, they put up an article that talked about how Nintendo was talking with suppliers about screens. Okay, so that was the one kind of, I guess, moment where we started to think of a revision similar to what they did with all their handhelds. So, shocking? Not really. But right now we have one Switch system, and we expect to have multiple Switch systems by the end of this year. And I kind of wanted to talk a bit about some of the possibilities here, at least one that I'm thinking that might stray from the idea of an ultra-powerful Switch. I kind of want to talk about the possibility of Nintendo actually introducing two Switch systems and then kind of phasing out the one we know now. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about why they might be doing that and kind of the dots that I've been working to connect with this and just an idea. Now, this isn't confirming anything. This isn't talking about anything other than me just kind of thinking about it and looking around a bit. Now, I have talked to people who, sources and people who would have some knowledge of if this is actually happening, and no one's really talking much. The only thing I can really say is it does appear that there are two that are actually even being semi-developed for right now. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of development needed for it, to be honest, and I'll talk about why. But the thing is, it does appear that two Switch systems are at least in production as we speak, and we could see possibly, I'm going to say could see, because this is part speculation, an announcement at E3 of one of the two, maybe even both. But Nintendo is known to announce something one month and then release it the next, even if they tell a publication like a Eurogamer about like the DS Lite, and then they announce it like a week later or something. So don't be surprised if they announce it one month and then release it the next. Mostly because I don't think it's going to have to be purchased. I don't think there's a necessity to buy either of these technically. But let's actually go over what I think could be happening here. So the Switch is using the Tegra X1. The story about that seems to go that Nvidia had a large amount of X1s basically sitting around because the Nvidia Shield did not take off the way they wanted it to, neither did the Shield TV. Although, to be fair, the Shield TV is a good system. I have one over here. It works well for emulating and stuff. The games aren't really great, though, so there you go. I guess they took a shot. They couldn't find a place for the X1, so they had an overflowing stock. Here comes Nintendo. They get a good deal on the X1, and they drop it in, and then, of course, we find out the security flaws and all this stuff. That's one of the things that really points to Nintendo and Nvidia coming to a pretty good agreement on pricing for these things. So here's the issue we're running into right now. It appears from what I, and I'm sure several other people are hearing, that the 20nm X1 is kind of being moved away from at this point, as in it's becoming more of a hassle to continue creating these things. Now, the Switch wasn't unknown when it came out, and here we are now north of 30 million, basically. So I think a lot of people, Nvidia, maybe even Nintendo, I mean, they even mentioned it, are kind of caught off guard by the roaring success of the Switch. So now they're sitting here having to produce quite a few 20nm X1s, I believe, at this point. And it's kind of cutting into, I would assume, their factory lines and everything at TSMC, who is responsible for creating and developing chips alongside Nvidia and manufacturing them, essentially. So let's kind of talk about what we can see here. So first thing we have to look at is, where is Nvidia now? Because they're, of course, on Turing right now, and whether you like them or not, I think the RTX line in it right now with the 2070 and 2080 are overpriced for what they provide, personally. But that's kind of where they are now. I think it's a first generation type card, and next gen will probably be better. But they are on a 12nm FinFET process right now, so it's smaller than they've ever been at 12 nanometers. Now, you might be wondering, what does that mean exactly? Well, Nvidia's on 12 nanometer. AMD, I believe, is on 7 now because they introduced the world's first 7nm card, and it's not even like that amazing compared to what Nvidia is doing with 12 nanometers in their RTX line. But there's a pretty cool article that I'll leave down below that actually goes over how a chip is made, which is kind of neat. I don't know, it's kind of a neat little article to go through if you're just curious. But the one thing you have to take from this is the smaller the manufacturing process, the more transistors can fit on a single die, which means it will bring increased efficiency. And generally with efficiency comes lower power draw and more power, more performance for that power draw. So maybe you just go crazy with performance, but you can keep the power under control because of it. That's kind of why you do those things. That's kind of why you push for a smaller fabrication process. And that's why they've all been working towards that at this point, where we've gone from, 20 nanometers with the X1 and, what were we on, Maxwell at the time, and now we're down to 7 nanometer on AMD's side or 12 nanometer on Nvidia side, and they're going to continue pushing. I believe even Intel's down to what, 14 nanometer, I think, with some of their latest stuff, 12 nanometer. So everyone's pushing to drop the fabrication process and everything so they can fit more transistors and get better chips and better GPUs or CPUs. So the issue we run into now is that TSMC is the one who creates these chips alongside Nvidia. And you, of course, only have so many places to create these things. And if the 20 nanometer line is kept open because of this X1 that the Switch is using, that can become kind of a problem. That can actually become kind of pricey, considering you may have tons of lines that are open for things like 12 nanometer, kind of 16 nanometer, I guess, because they do like the drive for self-driving cars and stuff. But 12 nanometer, of course, would be better if everything was on that at this point. And AMD takes up some of TSMC as well, as they're working with them, I believe, on their 7 nanometer stuff. So they're already kind of split between Nvidia and AMD at this point. And it would be really annoying to have to keep a 20 nanometer line open just for the Switch when you could probably work it into any of the other lines with 12 nanometer, for example, or even, I guess, 16 at that point. So even from TSMC's side, who word is they might be the ones who are kind of like, hey, maybe let's move away from this 20 nanometer line for the Switch. Can we kind of change the process down a bit? That's kind of what we're looking at here. With the current word and the rumors right now is that is contributing to these revisions. More of a, hey, we got to do this kind of thing, So I think it was maybe something they were planning from the beginning if it took off. So the question now is, where do they go from here and how do they do this? Because let's say they are moving away from 20 nanometers. The current Switch we know now would be phased out. They wouldn't keep making those chips, if that makes sense, right? They would just say, okay, this Switch is going to go the way of the 3DS XL. How eventually they just stopped selling it, right? And then we have what, the new 2DS XL at this point. We have the new 3DS XL, and then we have the 2DS, right? So I could see them moving away from this Switch and possibly leaving just 2 systems on the market. And that's kind of where my theory and my thought process around this comes from. I feel like they're going to create a chip, probably will be custom, because the only chip that I know of that is a 12 nanometer that we still don't really know that much about is their Tegra Xavier. So Xavier was talked about in 2018 at CES, and we haven't really heard much about it. In fact, I thought it was supposed to launch in 2018, but here we are in 2019, and I haven't seen anything about it at this point. And I don't think Xavier would show up in a Switch in its current form. I think they'd mostly use the 12 nanometer fabrication process, but there are some massive benefits that could come from that, even if they don't have this chip that drops in as it is. As an example, the memory bandwidth would be massively higher if they decided to do this. So currently, what the current Switch is like a 64-bit bus width, whereas if they jump to Xavier, they would go all the way up to a 256-bit bus, which would be massive. Like massive. That would be a huge jump. That'd be from like 25 gigabytes per second or whatever to like 137. So it would be huge jump if they wanted to do that. I also wonder if they would even go to 8 gigabytes of memory, but it's possible. I guess they could stay with 4, as that's what developers are working with now, and they've kind of gotten used to. But 8 would, of course, help. If it's there, that chip would certainly benefit from it, whereas I question the current X1 if it would really benefit from 8. To be honest, I think 4 is really what all that thing really needs for the X1. But Xavier would certainly benefit from that. And that's going to be the question. Would they use the same processor to customize this chip coming in? Would they use that to keep pretty much everything the same? I feel like they would probably have to, or at least include that cluster that's currently in the X1, was A57s, drop those in, and then also have a high-performance CPU that can be kind of sit next to it if they need to shift to it. That's, of course, if they have their own games for it, like games that only work for this one. And I still question that, if that would be a thing. But if they move to a 12-nanometer FinFET process and everything from TSMC, and it falls kind of in line with Xavier, I could see this chip actually pushing close to what the base Xbox One is now, the VCR one, to be honest. I don't know if it'll be 1 teraflop of floating point 32. It might be like 800 gigaflops or something, which would, of course, still more than double what the current Switch's performance is. I question if it would get to 1 teraflop, but I can tell you this, through Nvidia's little tricks like their memory compression and their more efficient chips overall, we would probably still get very close to that base Xbox One performance, even sitting somewhere around like 800 to 900 gigaflops. I think that's completely possible. So from there, some other evidence that's kind of start to pop up at this point around Nvidia possibly creating a new Tegra chip, because if you remember, we saw the same X1 pop up in the Shield TV. Do you remember that? The X1 in the Shield TV and the X1 in the Switch are pretty much exactly the same. And now there's some evidence starting to go around where there's a new Shield TV controller and remote being built right now, which would probably point to a new Shield TV. And of course, if Nvidia is going to be producing these chips, and Nintendo doesn't really care if they drop it into their own configuration, obviously, with their Shield TV, and they're working on a new fabrication with 12 nanometers for a Tegra, they're going to want to put it everywhere they can, and they would probably want to put it in their Shield TV. That makes complete sense. Now, this doesn't technically confirm it, but I don't really know why you'd make a new controller and a new remote. This was actually reported that I saw on XDA Developers. I don't know why you would do that otherwise if you're not going to be creating a new Shield TV. Technically, they can move the X1 over, but I think even Nvidia is ready to move on from that 20 nanometer configuration, that process they have, and move into something like a 12. So look at it this way. Here's what I think could happen. You have your current Switch. That gets dropped in price, right, just to clear them out. You get the $300 new Nintendo Switch that moves in, and that is your replacement. More powerful, of course. Things would run better, basically. Think of anything with dynamically scaling resolutions that would stay closer to the roof most times. Things that struggle with frame rate to smooth out. That's kind of what I'm thinking would happen. And then we move into a lower cost Switch, right? Where they start removing things that cost money, whether it's the rumble, the ability to dock, and then they shrink the screen. That's what I think was going to happen there. I think you're going to have a new chip that possibly could be built on a 12 nanometer move in. It gets underclocked for this lower end Switch. The screen's smaller, which would possibly make the resolution smaller on that screen. Keep in mind, the Vita was what, 540p or something? They could probably get away with that there. Shrink the screen, lower the clock speed on that chip, get better battery life while probably having better performance with a lower resolution screen, and then you get it out the door at $200. So we have a $200 Switch, and then we have a $300 Switch. I don't really know what you name the $200 Switch that possibly does not dock. Now, that's the thing about this situation. If you look at the current dock that we have, it is built for that 6.2-inch screen. If you shrink the screen, how does that system dock with the current docks? It probably wouldn't. It wouldn't fit. So you would have to also introduce a brand new dock, and that would probably be sold separately. That whole thing seems weird. So I kind of feel like that it sounds weird. It does, but if I had told you years and years ago that Nintendo's going to create a 3DS that doesn't have 3D in it, you would call me crazy as well. So I at least understand the thought process there, as they want to get this thing out the door as cheap as possible. But let me know what you guys think about this down below. Some thoughts I had, and just kind of looking at it from the other side of, sure, I know a lot of people want a very powerful system, but I don't think the current Switch is going to stick around if they move to a new fabrication process. And I think from what I've heard, that's why this is all happening really in the first place. They're moving on from that 20 nanometer fabrication process. A new Shield TV is apparently showing up from what we're getting here. So it's all kind of pointing to a new customized chip, which is exciting, by the way, for fans of the Tegra. Like, I really like the Tegra chipset. Before the Switch, I was hoping it would find a place. It has. The Switch has really pushed it forward, and it sounds like we're going to get a new Tegra chipset alongside of all of this. So it's exciting stuff, definitely. Some thoughts I had, though, on this. I'm hoping E3, we get an announcement for it. Otherwise, a month or two after that, and then we have a fall release for one or even both of them. But let me know what you guys think down below if this sounds like what could happen, or if you're still thinking we're going to have like a $200 Switch, a $300 Switch, and a $400 Switch where you have the Mini, the regular, and the Pro. I mean, at this point, anyone could be right about it. But let me know what you guys think about that down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.